Welcome to episode 4 of the Dateline Downtown podcast. This is your host, Juan Hernandez, here with a very special guest for the first time, Kristopher Sharp. Kristopher, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Juan. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so happy you all are doing these podcasts. I think they're really great.
Thank you. Ted has been doing a really good job interviewing other people, so
Ted's
it's my
awesome.
first time interviewing, so it'll go well.
You'll do fine.
So we're not gonna really get into a lot about you specifically, since we already did that with Ted for our upcoming issue.
Yeah.
We're mainly going to talk about the topic on homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who may not know, homelessness was part of your upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you briefly describe what that was like? Because many college students like myself do not have a clue as to what an experience like that can be for a young child.
Yeah, homelessness is difficult, for anyone, but particularly for young people. I had just turned 18 when I was homeless, and I come from a background where I don't have a lot of support systems. I grew up in foster care, so it was particularly challenging, and I think a lot of young homeless people find themselves in those circumstances. And so, when we talk about homelessness, we got to think about a couple of things. The narrative around homelessness has typically been one that we should try to change. And so, we talk about homelessness like we talk about diabetes or bipolar, right? No one is born homeless. People are without homes, and so that's how I like to think about it. Because people become homeless due to a set of circumstances that have happened to them. No one is just automatically homeless. And so I think that most young people who are homeless have, similar circumstances that lead them to be homeless. And so it's challenging because you don't really have anyone to fall back on. And you feel like you're alone a lot. And being homeless in a big city like Houston is, somewhat of a blessing and a curse, because Houston is, the hub for human trafficking. When you're homeless, you are struggling to survive and meet basic needs. And so there's really three things that young homeless people engage in, and that is, one, they either become violent criminals where they rob people, or they break into houses to meet their needs. Two, they a lot of times get engaged in the street economy through dealing drugs, or three, they end up in sex work. And a lot of times when you're doing survival sex, that can lead to trafficking. So it is certainly something that is difficult for anyone, but particularly for young people who feel like they don't have support systems.
So generally what you're saying is it's labels being placed on homeless people.
Yeah, and really it's about support systems. Mm-hmm. It's about young people having connections, because people end up homeless because they don't have the connections they need to not be homeless.
Do you believe that this way of thinking, the way that people think about when it comes to homeless people, can be changed instead of judging somebody for how they look or how they act?
Yeah. There's a really a good experiment that happened in Los Angeles a couple years ago. What they did is they put, they had regular streets and sidewalks, and they put big signs on them and pasted them to the ground. And they said, you'd stop to take a look at this sign, but you would just pass up a homeless person. And it was shocking. They had video watching it, and so people would stop and stare at these signs, but they would pass up people, and we do that all the time, right? We're at University of Houston downtown. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of homeless people here, and a lot of times we just pass them and ignore them, and we automatically make judgments about them. And so I think that a big part of that is we blame homeless people for being homeless, mm-hmm. and it's their fault. They're not working hard enough. They're not doing the things they need to do in order to not be homeless. And I think that a big part of changing the way we think about homelessness, again, thinking about people as being without homes rather than them being homeless, is very important. No one chooses to be homeless. There are very few people who will actually say, I am choosing to be homeless. Mm-hmm. But even, those folks probably would rather be housed somewhere. And so we need to really begin to think about homeless people as people and understand them in their environment. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is understanding the things that have led them to be homeless. I was homeless because I grew up in the foster care system, and I didn't have connections. And, when I turned 18, I had to leave the home that I was in, and that made me homeless. There are a lot of LGBT people, particularly LGBT youth, who are homeless because they come out to their families and they get kicked out. In fact, 40% of the homeless population, homeless youth population, identifies LGBT, and so we really have to look at what are those circumstances. Why is this family not accepting? What can we do to help them? This young person who aged out of the system, why don't they have resources to become self-sufficient? And when we do that, I think we can begin to change the way we think about homeless people and homelessness.
That actually answers some of the questions that I had on here. I mean, personally, growing up, I'm not gonna lie, but I whenever I saw a homeless person, I would make that judgment right away. But in coming across people like yourself, and like you said, you gotta look at them as human beings, not as just some, like, I guess, trash or
and
whatever you may call it.
Yeah, and you're right. I think a lot of people do see homeless people as trash. We certainly discard them in our minds the same way we would discard trash. And I think it's really important to again understand the circumstances that led to people being homeless. I experienced the same things when I was homeless. I wasn't the type of person where I wanted to beg people for money. I did a lot, and I got passed up a lot, in fact, most of the time I did. It was a struggle just to meet my basic needs, and it was one of the reasons why I had to turn to sex work in order to survive. And I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of people turn to engaging in other illicit behavior. And the resources are stigmatized for homeless people as well. There are a lot of resources that are out there for folks, but a lot of times there are barriers to accessing them. A lot of times for LGBT people, there are many organizations such as Star of Hope where their faith-based mission excludes LGBT people, and so it's difficult for you to feel comfortable even being in that environment. So it's really important for us to look at the ways that we are navigating, dealing with homelessness, and think about the ways that we think about these people.
So would you say it's a combination of being misinformed or a fear of reaching out for help?
I think it's both, yeah. For homeless youth particularly, whenever you become homeless, the first thing that pops into your mind, you don't think about, well, what are the shelters or services available to me, right? You have no ideas about systems or bureaucracies or the things that go behind these things, and so that's not what happens. And so I think, one, yes, young people and people in general are misinformed about the services that are available to them, and then two, I think that there is some difficulty in even obtaining those services because a lot of these places place restrictions on people. For instance, most of the shelters in Houston, they make you leave during the day. And so you can come at night and sleep, but a lot of them won't allow you to bring weapons into the facilities, for instance. And so, yes, we can justify that, right? We think about that. We want people to be safe in here.
Yeah.
We want the volunteers to be safe, the other clients who are here to be safe as well. But think about when you put those people back on the street the next day, how are they going to protect themselves? Being homeless is a dangerous thing, and the things that they're engaged in, probably to meet their basic needs, are dangerous as well. And so a lot of places won't even let you bring bags or stuff in, so that's a barrier. And so you have to really begin to look at those things in order to look at how we can alleviate homelessness. And so both are really issues. Misinformation and fear of reaching out.
When the latest numbers for homeless students in America were released by the Department of Education, what was your initial reaction? Were you surprised, or were you already aware of this, I don't want to call it epidemic, but this ongoing problem?
Yeah, well, it is an epidemic. It's the numbers are shocking, and I was surprised but not surprised. The way that we are looking at things is different, and I think worldviews need to change. And so one of the big things is that our legislators all around the country, the federal legislators and state legislators, are not investing money into resources that they used to. And what's you've seen is a lot of cut in services to people who are homeless. Now, when you talk about students who are homeless, a lot of young people now feel the pressures to go to college. You have to go to college in order to meet your basic needs. In Texas, and particularly at UHD, we have a high number of out-of-state students who are categorized as out-of-state, where they pay double the tuition. And so with limited financial aid, with limited access to resources from families, if they have families, you can see how challenging it would be for a young person to pay for tuition and be able to meet their basic needs. But if you think about the pressures they face, you think about the fact that we have to go to college now to do anything, and that's in young people's heads. I mean, it's ingrained early on, particularly all throughout high school. So to be able to meet those needs is challenging for young people. And so we've seen a rise in tuition. We've seen a decrease in public assistance with financial aid, but also with other resources as well. I mean, dormitories are just, mind-blowing how much it costs you to stay on campus, and they require you to buy a meal plan and all these other things. It's just ridiculous. So it's no wonder students are finding themselves in situations where they do not have adequate housing.
It's amazing. I wasn't aware myself of this epidemic that was going on until I saw your story on Fox 26 News, and where they also mentioned the homelessness within the LGBT community, which you already elaborated on. And it's very, I find it very, very satisfying to see a success story like yourself, fighting the, what am I trying to say here?
Fighting the good fight.
Fighting the good fight, helping the initiative. What are some of the things that you have done to help the initiative or campaign to fight this epidemic?
Yeah, well, LGBT homelessness is a huge issue all across our country. When you think of 40% of the homeless youth population being LGBT, that's almost 1 in every 2. That is staggering. And so, one of the big things that we're doing right now, Houston is one of 2 priority cities that were chosen to create a blueprint to address LGBTQ homelessness throughout our nation, Houston and Cincinnati. And we were chosen because, 1, we have a very good infrastructure already, but 2, because we have a lot of work to do. And so, working with various agencies, I'm a social worker as well, so I can see it from both perspectives. From the perspective of an individual, a client who was homeless before, trying to access services, and from the perspective of a worker who is there to provide services. And so I can see a lot of the barriers that we face. I've talked about Star of Hope. Covenant House was one a couple of years ago. They used to restrict LGBT people from coming to their facilities, and a lot of times they would disenfranchise them, put them in corners, segregate them from the rest of the population, further disenfranchising them. Transgender people have difficulty accessing homeless shelters as well, and it's because of the policies that are in place at a lot of these places. So one of the big things that we're doing now is looking at how can we make these policies more LGBT friendly. We don't need to segregate LGBT people. We certainly don't need to deny trans people from having access to these shelters, and we don't need to allow those people to be harassed in there. I read a study recently that indicated that almost 60% of trans people reported being harassed in a homeless shelter, and that's ridiculous. And trans people shouldn't have to deal with that type of harassment. No one should, particularly people who are trying to get on their feet, who are trying to be homeless. So looking at those policies at our existing infrastructure, seeing where we can make things more friendly, but also looking at what we can do to help provide resources to these people, the young people who are being kicked out of their homes because their families don't support them. How can we educate those families? How can we talk to those families about, the challenges that these young people are facing? How can we get them to be more accepting? Where can we find support systems for these people? Looking at all of those things are really important, and so it's something that's going to take a long time. It's something that's going to take a lot of effort, but we are working towards trying to make a dent in the issue.
Kristopher, thank you very much for being on the show. Do you have a website where people can reach you? Twitter, maybe?
Of course, people can Twitter
Facebook?
me and Facebook me. I'm on Twitter at Sharp Kristopher. That's SharpKristopher. And I think Facebook is the same too. But if you follow me on Twitter, I think I have links there. So yeah, really important stuff. I think that it's great that you all are taking a look at this, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you very much. And for all the listeners out there, you can always visit us at Dateline Downtown on Facebook. Follow us at the Dateline and visit the website datelinedowntown.com/podcast for all podcasts, including Kristopher Sharp. Kristopher, thank you.
Thank you, Juan.